Why was Shadowrun 6th edition such a dumpster fire? It was so bad you couldn't even find a pirated copy of it when it first came out because it was so universally dismissed by the community that nobody was even willing to put up a copy of it for other people to download illegally. That's how little anyone cared about 6th edition. And like, I got it, when it first came out, which was a huge mistake. Because I had a group of people who were, pretty fresh to role playing at the time, and they wanted something other than Dungeons and Dragons to play. And the book had just come out, and they all liked the idea of Shadowrun, and ended up really liking playing Shadowrun. But everybody from the new players to us veterans agreed that 6th edition was just trash and we would never play it again. I have no doubt that I could get them to play Shadowrun again, but it definitely wouldn't be in the 6th edition system. That Shadowrun 6th edition is bad, is not in dispute. It's awful. But why was it so bad? Besides like the normal excuses people give, like, oh, Catalyst Game Labs are dog shit at editing, which is true. They can't make a game to save their life. That's debatable, but clearly this isn't a good example of it. And I was going through the book and just trying to find what it was that made it so bad. And I compiled a list. They might have fixed a lot of this stuff in post, with updates and erratas and supplement books and stuff like that. I don't know. I haven't looked at any of the supplement books that have come out for this so far. I don't think that there's any salvaging it. I don't think that there's any bringing people back to 6th edition. The initial fumble was so massive that I don't think that they can recover except to make a new edition. And even that's going to be very difficult because who has any trust in this anymore? They would have to do what like Wizards is doing right now and release like Shadow 1 or something stupid like that, and just spend 2.5 years play testing it with the community to really get it in a position that where people want it. Which is a dangerous prospect even of itself because role playing's not like a competitive game with real rules. It really is whatever rules you want to use. And even in 1D&D, if you just save all those Unearthed Arcana PDFs, you basically have a functioning player's handbook by the end of all that totally for free. Most people are still going to buy it because the player's handbook that comes out is not going to be the same as all the stuff that did come out for the Unearthed Arcanas, but it's going to be pretty close. And there's no reason you couldn't use what was in the Unearthed Arcanas instead of what they release as the official supplement if you like it better. So I think there's no better place to start than the changes they made to Edge. Edge in previous editions of Shadowrun was very straightforward. It was a pool of resources that you had that you spent to give yourself overwhelming advantage on a roll in order to ensure that you passed it, or that you spent to save yourself from suffering a massive catastrophe. And generally, one expenditure of Edge in a previous edition was a huge deal. It added like a whole bunch of dice to your pool, it re-rolled stuff, it saved you from dying, which Edge still does in this, but this is inundated with some kind of weird overlaying system where you have your normal pool of Edge, like you have how much ever Edge you have in your Edge stat, and then you're constantly gaining and spending a bunch of temporary Edge to get these really mild, virtually worthless effects. Oh, you can spend an Edge to reroll one single dice out of your pool. This is probably the most used one that ever came up in any of the games that we played of 6th edition, because if you were lucky, all you ever got was one temporary Edge. You can spend 2 Edge to get +1 to a single dice, which means you can turn a 4 into a success or avoid a glitching by turning a 1 into a 2, which is worthless if you roll a 2 or 3. So you can't spend it on dice that roll 2 or 3 because they don't upgrade into anything useful. You can spend 2 of your own Edge to negate the Edge of a foe. There's so many actions. 3 Edge buys you an automatic hit, 4 Edge boot. Add your Edge to your dice pool was just the effect Edge had. That was just what you spent 1 point of Edge in previous editions to do. You have to spend 4 points of Edge to do that in this edition. What on earth? It doesn't make any sense. And then you can spend 5 Edge to do special roleplay effects. And there's also edge actions you spend doing stuff that you would have normally done in previous editions, but now you have to spend edge to do it. I guess, for example, like the call shots, you normally have to take a massive penalty, but if you spend the edge, you don't take the penalty to calling the shot. But it's 5 edge. Just take the penalty. You're never going to spend that much edge. You get most of your temporary edge in combat from having a leg up on your opponent, either because you played into this ridiculous attack and defense rating system, which I'll talk about a little later, but was so completely vestigial and needless we forgot it was there half the time. It just tells you to reward players with edge for random stuff like it's dark out or it's raining or something like that. But no matter what you do to get extra temporary edge, you can still only gain 2 edge in a single combat round. And you're supposed to save it across multiple rounds to buy these huge effects. Because God forbid combat doesn't take 2.5 hours. And that is really what it felt like. It was just my players and the NPCs plinking away at each other until one of them saved up enough edge to add their edge bonus and really blow somebody out, and that was it. It was just sticky and unintuitive. I hate this. Why does edge have to be like this? What did they think this was going to accomplish? Edge has always been like a hero point system. You spend it to either make sure you pass something or avoid failing and suffering a massive catastrophe. You have a limited number of edge equal to your edge stat for like the whole, I don't know, section of the campaign or session or whatever. The big drawback to edge being that powerful was that it didn't come back very easily. And if you avoided dying with it, you permanently burned it, so you had less edge overall to make sure that you succeeded. The edge system in previous editions was fine. What did it gain by changing it to all of this? I understand that this is like old news also. Like, obviously I'm not saying anything new. Shadowrun 6th edition came out like years ago. Like, it's been a bit though, and I wouldn't be surprised if Shadowrun 7th edition wasn't gonna get announced in the next like year or two. So it's at this point that the community should start thinking about that. Not that they have much to think about in regards to that. If they don't do a lot of public playtesting, it's just going to flop completely. I don't know if this game can stand another flop. They're going to have to sell it to the people who make like Savage Lands, and you're just going to run Shadowrun in that for the rest of your life. Oh my god, they're going to have to end up like making 5th edition supplements for Shadowrun. Just completely cuck to 5th edition like every other roleplay game is done and release like 5th edition supplements for it. That's what they're going to have to do. Which is a shame because Shadowrun to me was always one of the last holdouts of D&D's like insidious stranglehold it has over the roleplay industry. As ineffectual as Shadowrun has always been at being a competitor to Dungeons & Dragons, there once was a time where they were probably running pretty close to each other, but that time is long, long over. Attack and defense ratings were the other weird thing that they added on. It was just another layer to the combat that you had to constantly calculate every round with every action, and it was just so obnoxious. In order for it to come into play, one of the 2 ratings had to be 4 higher than the other rating. And what you got for having a higher rating than the other person in combat was you got 1 point of temporary edge to either spend or then bank. The variations in attack ratings were very minimal, and the variations in defense rating for armors and stuff was also very minimal. If you bothered to calculate attack and defense rating, for the most part, they would be within 2 of each other every time. Virtually nobody ever got the temporary edge. I suppose that the initial plan for it was that what they wanted was for people to accurately describe what they were doing in combat. If they didn't have a high enough attack rating, they would be like, I use my move action to like climb the fire escape and get like elevation so that I can increase my attack rating but then that doesn't do anything anyway because that's just environmental edge. Having elevation on somebody, you already get a temporary edge point if the DM awards it to you for that. The only character in the player group that actually got temporary edge consistently for the attack and defense rating was my friend who was running like essentially just an orc tank. Like, they just maxed out their body stat and maxed out their cyberware for soaking damage and had like the thickest armor, and they just went total defense. So every time they were attacked, they did get a temporary edge most of the time, but even then that didn't always work out. It not only is it completely vestigial and complicates everything, it was totally needless and also completely ineffective. This system virtually didn't come into play at all. It was so worthless. I think that a lot of this comes down to Catalyst Game Labs having a fear of powerful characters. In 4th edition, you could get your character to do a lot of really cool, really powerful stuff. They tried blocking out your power level in 5th edition by having a weird rule where like you had to cap the number of successes you could get on a roll. So even if you were rolling like 15 dice, it was possible to only ever get 2 successes in that roll. The advantages that you can earn for playing smart or having a good character are very minute. You have all of these actions. Initiative is always something that Shadowrun has struggled with. Gaining extra actions every initiative pass was like a huge deal in previous editions. In this one, if you have max wired reflexes, you get like 2 major actions and 1 minor. So if you totally max out your initiative value, you get to attack twice. That's what you get out of it. Essentially, you had like a really weird action economy where you had like 1 major action and 1 minor action, and then each like thing that gave you initiative dice also gave you an additional minor action. You can trade up from minor actions to major actions at a rate of 4-to-1. So at max level, you could have 2 attacks. They really didn't want you attacking more than once in this edition or doing anything meaningful. I feel like other role-playing games have their major and minor actions listed in blurbs that only take up like half a page. Like nowadays, major and minor actions and what you can do in them is like, look, here's what you're doing. You're attacking, or you're doing something actually impactful to the scenario, or you're doing something really minor, or you're moving. And then those are the 3 things you're doing. They only just need a list. Having like 3 or 4 pages dedicated to all of this stuff really just doesn't seem necessary. And that was something people largely forgot in the heat of the moment whenever they were just in combat. They're like, all right, I'm trying to move into a better position and attack. And it was just the same result every single time. Could you blame me for maybe not making my combats a little more spicy? I tried. Combat also isn't necessarily the primary issue with Shadowrun, because most of the game you're trying to spend avoiding combat. If the run goes really well, then the only combats you get into are the ones that you plan on getting into. And because you planned on getting into them, you should be in a position to win them pretty handedly. Generally speaking, if combat kind of sprang up at the moment, you had to build a character around dealing with impromptu combat scenarios who could just totally trounce whatever like happened to come up, like you mistimed a guard rotation or something like that, and now you've got to like down 3 dudes in 10.5 seconds in order to keep the run alive. That's what impromptu combats always felt like they should be, and they shouldn't just be like random encounters, or they shouldn't feel like pitched battles like they do in other games, where no matter what, combat is just this kind of really stagnant back and forth until somebody falls over. But that's what this system, with all of its initiatives and edges and actions and all those changes, made it into. Why does strength do literally nothing? There's another question for you. Strength only does like 2 things. It adds to the attack rating for unarmed attacks and carrying capacity. It doesn't help increase your damage with melee attacks. You don't form your attack pool with it for melee attacks. All attack pools are made out of agility. Literally every one. Doesn't matter what you're attacking with. You could be attacking with like a giant minigun that you're holding that shoots like 2-handed battle axes, and you're still rolling agility with that attack roll. Why are toxins and poisons so strong in this edition? So they all have this like power value, which is the target number you have to overcome in order to not be affected by them. So you have to roll like body plus whatever cyber you have to avoid being affected by the toxins. And you have to get a number of successes that equals or beats the power value to not be affected by them. So like normal alcohol by itself is a 6. You got to get 6 successes to not just get affected by taking a shot. Which, I mean, like, that's not the least of your worries. The most of your worries is like things like Narcojet. Like, how are you supposed to get 15 successes? Again, the most powerful character that I could think of, the most defensive character that somebody built that I workshopped with them, also had max toxin resist, and they would always get knocked out by Narcojet. Like, it was physically impossible for them to roll enough successes to avoid being hurt by Narcojet. Even things like tear gas, like, they couldn't beat tear gas. And you're always affected by a minimum duration. So like if the enemy just decided to launch tear gas canisters at them, he would just be affected with all of these status effects for 5 minutes. Doesn't matter how much cyberware he has crammed inside his body, doesn't matter how big his body stat is, you're getting your 5 minutes of nausea. Like if you just get hit with a knockout dart, you're falling asleep. There's no stopping it. It got to a point I just told people not to roll. I would just be like, don't worry about rolling it. We're just determining the amount of time you're affected by it. At one point, he did get hit by a knockout dart. I think fired from one of the other players for roleplay reasons. They knocked him unconscious so that he wouldn't kill somebody. And I was like, okay, you guys have 1 hour to remedy the situation because he will wake up completely unfazed in exactly 1 hour. Because he couldn't roll the 12 or 15 target number. He had to roll to beat that. And he was like, okay, so what do I do? I'm like, you just sit tight for an hour of game time. And then when your hour comes up, you just open your eyes and you're immediately back to normal. It was silly. It doesn't matter whether you're the wispiest elf or the hardiest troll. You will always be knocked unconscious for an hour because you just can't possibly roll that high. Of course, their editing was still doo-doo. Everything about their editing is always really bad. In these rulebooks, they can't, for the life of them, just sit down and properly structure sections of a book. It's like beyond them. I think maybe you have to sign a contract when you go to work for Catalyst explaining that you don't know how to structure like a rulebook. You have to promise them you don't. Like, you have to show them that, like, English was your lowest score on your SAT to work there. But that's a complaint that the community has lived with forever. Not that they should ever have had to have lived with it, but it is what it is. Using the Matrix is still awful. In the core rulebook, you should just be told not to worry about it. If somebody wants to dick around in the Matrix, you just tell them to roll their dice and then imagine however they want to imagine whatever's happening inside the Matrix. Every time I've ever tried to be Matrix friendly to the hacker or the technomancer, I end up spending like half the session with them because they're just truncated into their own reality, and it detracts so heavily from the session. It's not even funny. The astral plane doesn't have that problem. The astral plane just overlays the normal world, so you don't have to describe two different things that are happening. You just have to describe what's happening on the astral plane, which generally isn't much. The normal group could be like, you know, attacking a warren of junked out shamans and the Redmond Barons, and the hacker could be in like a circus for octopuses. And it's cool that it's there, but it's not cool if you have to actually deal with it. In fact, one person that I know that runs Shadowrun goes as far as to tell people to not be hackers. He's like, don't do it, don't put points into it, don't be a hacker or a technomancer. I am not going to emphasize hacking to the point that you'll ever need a hacker on one of your runs because I don't want to deal with the hacking. You guys shouldn't feel compelled to have to deal with the hacking. And generally, if somebody insists that they want to be one, he lets them, and what they do is they just pass like gateway rolls. The things that they do are specifically just role-oriented. He does not go through the trouble of explaining what happens in the Matrix, as I now refuse to do as well, because it's just... Again, I love Shadowrun, but I don't know how you mess up a core system that is so simple. Shadowrun's core system is one of the simplest things in the world. It's just d6 dice pool. Every point you have adds a dice to the pool. 5s and 6s are successes. Don't get more 1s than successes. It's that easy. How are you, one, so scared of your own system that you have to do everything in your power to stifle people's ability to roll a bunch of dice? And how do you layer such needlessly complex shit on top of such a simple system? There's a lot of things that I think I could suggest to make Shadowrun better. Go back to point-buy character creation like it was in 4th edition. Definitely get rid of all of the 6th edition changes. Attack and defense rating is an awful system. Temporary edge is an awful system. Strength actually needs to do things. And even of all the complaints I just listed, I'm sure there are many, many, many other complaints regarding other ways to play the game that plenty of other people have. It really feels like they intended for this to be the type of 5th edition really easy to get into, super simple system. Shadowrun 6th edition is the most stripped down version of Shadowrun. Like, you don't get simpler as far as official Shadowrun titles go. And I don't think stripping it down for people to try to get into it easier was the right move when you do it this way. Like, all you have to do is just embrace the dice pool. Be like, yeah, all of your attributes, all of your skills, all of the bonuses from your gear and cyberware and stuff, that all adds dice to your pool. Roll your dice and feel good about it. Oh, did you fuck up your roll? Spend an edge to re-roll it. Do you want to make sure you pass? Spend an edge to add your edge to the pool. Like, There's plenty of ways to do it that are super simple, and all of your gear and other stuff can do all these other effects that are interesting, but ultimately everything's about just grabbing up a big pool of dice and rolling them. That's how you do a simple system. You do not attempt to make people sit there and calculate a bunch of minutia and needless details that almost never come into play, or track accumulating resource over the course of multiple rounds of combat. I don't know, I was sad when it came out. I remember reading it being like, oh no, we're probably not going to end up doing this for very long. And sure enough, we didn't end up doing it for very long. We went on to playing other stuff, but like, I'm sure the group's going to want to go back to playing Shadowrun eventually, and when they do, it's not going to be in 6th edition. And like, what's Shadowrun getting for the rest of 2022, right? Well, they got this book, which is like an expanded player's handbook, which the game desperately needs. Then a bunch of novels. Like, I guess that's cool. Like, if you like reading the novels or like reading the novels, I don't know how good they are, but I'm not saying that they're bad. Novelizations about it does not strike me as what this floundering franchise requires. An art folio, all right. A calendar, great. That's what it's getting. It's a calendar. Oh, the Core Matrix rulebook. Okay, that actually kind of needs to happen, like desperately. Matrix should always be its own rulebook. I don't think it should ever actually be in the core rulebook. Oh, and then lest we forget the Edge Zone card game that Catalyst is re-releasing through Kickstarter. And the community is doing okay. Generally, people know what they want out of Shadowrun. And communities tend to have a lot of resources. They still use 5th edition or 4th edition or something like that, or even play something even older than that. Shadowrun was one of the biggest role-playing games at a point in time, and it's still beloved by the people who like it. The problem is it has just a really hard time garnering any new people who have interest in it, because the community despises what they release for it, so nobody's running any of the new stuff. New players don't like the idea of having to learn a really old system with a bunch of out-of-print books, or use a bunch of web apps, or try to get into really deep lore that can't just be handed to them in a book they buy from their local game store. I don't know, I love Shadowrun, but I really wonder how much longer it's going to be around. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I'm pretty sure they're going to have to just end up like selling it out to a universal system, or swallowing their pride and making like a 5th edition supplement. That's like the only new way they're going to get anybody to play the game. And that's not going to do anything with their older fans either, because they're still just going to end up using the same old systems that they had. Does something that works need an update just for the sake of money? No. But also yes, if you're a company. The gross mishandling of the property is just tragic. Now that there's a bunch of new supplements and options, and that's good that there are new options coming out for it, because the options in the core book felt kind of samey. It really felt like no matter what you did, you were the same as every other person. All of the adept powers, all of the cyberware, all of the magic buffs, not necessarily spells, all just gave you the same +4 to your dice pool in the end. It didn't feel very varied or nuanced, maybe with more supplements to what you can buy. That'll be a different... I think if what I had to do, if someone put a gun to my head and forced me to run Shadowrun 6th edition, I would just tell them to ignore a lot of stuff in it. I don't really know what you do to fix Shadowrun as far as like a system goes, or whether anybody really thinks it needs fixing. I think that's a topic for another video. I just really wanted to like complain for a little bit about this. It's so lame that something so cool has to suffer such a tragic fate. Anyway, that's it for this one. Keep playing Shadowrun, everybody.